A sharp squeal of microphone feedback cut through the warm September afternoon. Then came the soft, nervous breath of an 8-year-old girl standing too close to the speaker. Hi, my name is Piper Price, and the groom is my dad. I sat in the very back row of the Stonewall Resort garden, white plastic rented chairs dug into the grass. I wasn't invited to this wedding. I had driven 45 minutes just to drop Piper off for her father's custody weekend, intending to wait in the parking lot. But my daughter had squeezed my hand and asked me to stay, and nobody stopped the woman, in plain clothes, slipping into the back. The air smelled heavily of lavender. Shay, the bride, had plastered this dream wedding aesthetic all over the internet for months. A string quartet had just finished playing Canon in D, and the afternoon sun filtered through white linen drapery. I held a complimentary honey cocktail I had no intention of drinking. My left hand gripped my right beneath the table. The long surgical scar on the back of my neck began to itch the way it always did under extreme stress. Donovan stood at the front in a tailored suit. He smiled down at Piper, probably expecting a sweet, photo-ready moment. He always played the part of the perfect father when an audience was watching. Piper reached into her small backpack and pulled out an old iPad mini. The screen illuminated her face. "My dad sent a lot of texts," my daughter said into the microphone. Her voice echoed off the manicured hedges. "I saw them on my iPad because it still has his account. I didn't understand them all, but my teacher says if something confuses you, you should read it out loud and ask for help. So I am going to read some, and maybe someone can help me understand." Silence fell over 200 guests. The string players lowered their bows. "This one is from the night my mom was in the hospital," Piper read, her tone flat and measured, the way a child reads a textbook. "She had surgery on her back, and I was really scared. This text is from Dad to Shay. Shay is the bride. It says, 'She asked me to bring her robe. I forgot. Was at your place. Can you remind me tomorrow? I will grab it on my way to the hospital.'" A low murmur rippled through the back rows. Donovan stood perfectly still. He held a crystal champagne flute in his right hand. The glass tilted, and pale gold liquid spilled over the edge, dripping onto his crisp white cuff, but he didn't move to wipe it. Next to him, Shay's radiant bridal smile froze. I recognized that specific kind of muscular paralysis. I am a 36-year-old physical therapist, and I have seen that exact expression on patients right after I tell them their recovery will take 6 agonizing months. "And this one, same night," Piper continued. "She is out of surgery, doing okay. Might go see her in the morning. Miss you. Coming back now. Might go see her." The words hung over the white tables. Piper swiped her small finger across the screen. "This one is from Shay. She wrote it to my dad. My mom keeps asking when I will find someone good. If she knew you were married when we started, she would never speak to me again." I shifted my gaze to the front table reserved for the bride's family. Frances Calloway, a retired librarian with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, sat with her spine perfectly straight. Both of her hands flew up to cover her mouth. It wasn't just shock. She was physically holding back a scream. Her eyes locked onto her daughter in the pristine white dress. Shay looked down at the grass. Slowly, Frances lowered her hands. She picked up her linen napkin and folded it. The creases were sharp, precise, the automatic movement of a woman who had spent 30 years organizing returned books. She placed the square of fabric on the table, stood up, and walked down the center aisle. She never looked back. I watched the silver-haired woman walk away, and an immense, crushing exhaustion settled into my bones. There was no joy in this victory. The man standing at the altar hadn't just betrayed his wife. He had turned the bride's own mother into an unwitting accomplice to a lie, and now that lie was burning down everything it touched. 10 months earlier, I was the one bleeding on the asphalt. The shrill wail of an ambulance siren faded into the rhythmic, electronic beeping of a heart monitor. I opened my eyes to a blinding fluorescent light and a ceiling made of white acoustic tiles. The smell of iodine and sterile alcohol burned my throat. A thick plastic intravenous line pulled tight against the back of my hand, pumping cold fluids into my veins. I tried to shift my weight, and a spike of white-hot agony shot from my lower spine all the way up to my skull. My pain scale hit an 8 out of 10 before I even fully understood where I was. Route 19. The rain had been coming down in sheets. My car hydroplaned, spinning out of control before slamming hard into the concrete median. The emergency room doctors had rushed me into surgery for a spinal laminectomy and fusion of my lumbar vertebrae. I remember holding my phone in the ambulance, tapping Donovan's contact name over and over with a blood-smeared thumb. straight to voicemail. He finally walked into the intensive care unit at 8:47 the next morning. I know the exact time because my eyes had been glued to the round analog clock on the wall for hours. Donovan rushed to the side of the bed. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair slightly disheveled. He leaned over carefully and buried his face in my neck. "Oh God, Linnea," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry. I was at the office late, and my phone died. A coworker called me this morning and told me. I came straight here." I nodded against his shoulder, swallowing dryly. I didn't question him. I didn't ask why his office phone hadn't been working, or why he hadn't charged his cell on the charging pad. I knew he kept permanently plugged in on his desk. I was too heavily medicated, too frightened, and overwhelmingly grateful that my husband was finally standing beside me. I reached up and stroked the back of his neck, comforting the man who had left me alone in the dark. Piper came to visit the following afternoon. The hospital room felt too large and too quiet for a child, so she climbed up onto the edge of my mattress, being careful not to jostle my legs. She brought the old family iPad with her to play games. Neither of us thought about the fact that the device was still logged into Donovan's Apple account. She spent an hour drawing a picture on a digital canvas using her finger. When she held it up for me to see, I forced a tired smile. "That is beautiful, sweetie," I told her. She had drawn our family in the hospital room. There was a stick figure of a woman lying flat on a bed. Beside the bed stood a taller figure representing her father, but the man in the drawing wasn't looking at the bed. Piper had drawn him with his face turned entirely away, staring out a square window into the blank white space beyond. I asked Donovan to print it out for me, and I pinned it to the corkboard next to my recovery chart, thinking it was just a cute, clumsy sketch from an overwhelmed 8-year-old. 6 weeks into my recovery, the hospital routine became a dull, agonizing grind. The thin cotton gowns provided by the ward offered zero warmth against the aggressive air conditioning. I had asked Donovan to bring my heavy fleece robe from home. He forgot it on Tuesday. "Sorry, babe. The day just got away from me," he said, kissing my forehead. He forgot it again on Thursday. "Damn it, I left it sitting in the car, and I completely forgot to bring it up. I will grab it tomorrow." By Saturday, I stopped asking. I was a physical therapist, and I knew the value of pushing my own mobility limits. I convinced a sympathetic nurse to bring me a wheelchair, and I slowly, painfully transferred my weight into the seat. She pushed me down to the visitor parking garage. Donovan had left his spare key with me so I could fetch my own lip balm the week before. The garage smelled of damp concrete and motor oil. I leaned out of the chair, my fused spine protesting fiercely, and popped the trunk of his sedan. My gray fleece robe was sitting right there, neatly folded next to his golf clubs. It had been sitting in the trunk for a week. He just hadn't bothered to carry it up the elevator. I pulled the soft fabric onto my lap and slipped my hands into the pockets. My fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper. I pulled it out and smoothed it over my knee. It was an Applebee's receipt. Dinner for two, $47.83. 2 entrees, 2 drinks. I checked the date stamped at the top. It was from the previous Wednesday, the night Donovan had called me from his car to say he had to drive out to Clarksburg to meet a difficult client and would be home past midnight. I sat in the wheelchair, staring at the faded ink. The logical part of my brain kicked in immediately, building a protective wall. He probably just grabbed dinner with a coworker. Sales managers entertain colleagues all the time. I folded the receipt carefully, slipped it back into the pocket, and let the nurse wheel me back up to my room. When my husband arrived that evening, he brought a small bouquet of grocery store tulips. I didn't mention the receipt. "Did the insurance money come through yet?" I asked instead, shifting uncomfortably against the pillows. "The $43,000 from the health savings account. My spinal surgery had cost roughly $127,000 before coverage. Our joint account was supposed to be reimbursed for the massive out-of-pocket deductible I had painstakingly built up over years of working at the clinic." Donovan didn't look up from his phone. "Nah. They denied the first claim. I am appealing it right now. You know how this bureaucratic insurance nonsense works. It takes forever." "But the surgery was completely in-network," I said, a faint prickle of anxiety rising in my chest. I checked the provider list myself before the procedure. He finally looked at me, offering that smooth, charming smile he used to close pharmaceutical sales. "Babe, let me handle the finances. You just focus on your recovery, okay? I have got this." "Okay." I nodded and leaned back. I always said okay. By month 3, I was finally cleared to go home. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. For 9 years, I had earned my $72,000 salary teaching stroke victims and accident survivors how to walk again. Now, I was the one doing physical therapy exercises in my own living room 3 times a week, gripping the back of the sofa while trying to force my left leg to bear weight. Donovan's schedule shifted. His territory as a regional manager had suddenly expanded to cover Virginia, which meant 2 or 3 nights a week away from home. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Piper sat at the kitchen table while I did my stretches. She watched me wince as I lowered myself into a wooden chair. "Why is Dad always gone now?" she asked, kicking her feet against the table leg. I poured her a glass of milk, resting my hand on her shoulder. "Dad has to work hard to take care of us, sweetie. When people love each other, sometimes they have to make sacrifices. We have to be strong while he handles things for the family." I believed every single word I said to her. I believed I was teaching her resilience. Piper picked up a blue crayon and went back to her drawing paper. 10 minutes later, she pushed the sheet across the table toward me. It was a picture of our house, 3 distinct rooms. She had drawn me standing in the kitchen, leaning heavily on the counter. I scanned the rest of the page. "Where is Dad?" Piper didn't look up from her crayons. "He is not in the house. He is somewhere else." She stated it as a simple, undeniable fact, the way a child points out that the sky is blue. I looked at the empty spaces in the drawing, a cold draft pulling through the kitchen window, and for the first time, I felt the terrifying sensation that the ground beneath my feet was entirely hollow. By May, 5 months after the accident, the physical hollow I felt in my kitchen had been carefully covered up by the busy noise of daily life. I was working part-time at the clinic again. My body was healing, and with the heavy painkillers finally out of my system, my mind returned to its usual sharp precision. But my spine still punished me for pushing too hard. Late one Tuesday night, a familiar flare of dull, aching pain kept me awake. The bedroom was completely dark. Beside me, Donovan slept heavily, his back turned to my side of the mattress. His breathing was a slow, rhythmic metronome. I slid quietly out from under the quilt, grabbed my laptop from the nightstand, and carried it to the small armchair by the window to check my work emails. I opened the internet browser. A tab was already active. Donovan had left his bank portal logged in. I did not intend to pry. He had always managed the joint account because he was better with numbers, and I was happy to let him carry the mental load of paying the mortgage and the electric bills. But my eyes caught a line item that did not look like our usual grocery expenses. I scrolled down the statement. The screen cast a pale blue glow over my hands. There it was, a transfer of $1,850. It was scheduled for the 1st of the month. The recipient was listed simply as an account ending in 4417. The note attached to the transfer read miscellaneous household. My brow furrowed. I scrolled back to the previous month. April 1st. $1,850 transferred to account 4417. March 1st. The exact same amount. I kept clicking back through the digital pages, my heart beginning to beat a little faster against my ribs. February, January, December. All the way back. 14 consecutive months. I sat in the dark and did the math in my head. 14 months multiplied by $1,850 came out to $25,900. Miscellaneous household. I had no idea what account 4417 was. I had never seen that number on any of our financial documents. I had never signed paperwork for a secondary checking account. $25,000 was missing, quietly bleeding out of our joint savings while Donovan told me to focus on my recovery. I pressed the keyboard shortcut to take a screenshot of the statement. The screen flashed briefly. I saved the image to a hidden folder, closed the browser, and set the laptop on the floor. I climbed back into bed, pulling the quilt up to my chin. Donovan shifted in his sleep. As he rolled over, the scent of his cologne drifted across the pillows. It was not Bleu de Chanel, the crisp scent I had bought him for his birthday 3 years in a row. This smell was completely different. It was sweeter, younger, something floral with notes of vanilla that did not belong in our house. I lay perfectly still in the shadows. I listened to the steady rise and fall of his chest. For 9 years, I had believed every breath he took was for our family. For the first time, lying in the dark beside the man I married, I found myself wondering who he was breathing for. The curiosity gnawed at the edges of my mind, slowly twisting into a cold, heavy dread. I did not wake him. I closed my eyes and practiced the controlled silence I had learned as a child. 2 days passed before I gathered the courage to ask him. During my lunch break at the physical therapy clinic, I sat in the small staff kitchen holding a mug of lukewarm tea. A voice inside my head kept whispering to let it go. It was the ghost of my mother, a woman who had suffered through chronic illness and a lonely marriage without ever raising her voice. Do not make a big deal out of nothing, her memory told me. There is probably a perfectly reasonable explanation. You are just paranoid because the nerve pain is making you tired. Do not cause trouble when people are taking care of you. But $25,900 was not nothing. It was not a rounding error. It was a deliberate, monthly drain. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his tone brisk and professional. "Hey babe," he said. "I am right in the middle of a spreadsheet. What is up?" "I am sorry to interrupt," I said, keeping my voice soft and perfectly level. "I was just looking at the bank statements to check on a clinic deposit, and I noticed a monthly transfer. It goes to an account ending in 4417. Do you know what that is?" I counted the seconds of silence that followed. 1, 2, 3. "Oh, that," Donovan finally said. The hesitation was gone, replaced by a smooth, easy cadence. "That is the storage unit. I rented a space to keep my dad's old furniture." $1,850 a month for a storage unit? I asked. "It is a massive commercial space, Linnea. Plus, it is climate controlled. You know how delicate those antique wood cabinets are. They need consistent humidity. Since when have we had this unit? Since maybe sometime last year? I am pretty sure I mentioned it to you. You probably just forgot because you were dealing with so much at the time. You know, being in the hospital and all the medication." "Right. The hospital. Yeah, sometime around then. Look, I have a client calling on the other line. I will see you tonight, okay?" The call disconnected. I slowly lowered the phone to the table. My hands were trembling slightly. It was not from fear. It was the shock of recognizing the distinct rhythm of a lie, the 3 seconds of dead air, the sudden flood of unnecessary details. A person telling the truth does not need to specify that the furniture is antique and the unit is climate-controlled to explain a bank transfer. They just answer the question. I opened the search engine on my phone and typed in "storage units, Morgantown, West Virginia, $1,850 a month." I scrolled through the results. The largest, most premium climate-controlled storage facility in the entire county cost $450 a month. The next afternoon, I sat in my car in the clinic parking lot. Spring had finally arrived in full force. The windows were rolled halfway down, letting in the sweet, earthy smell of fresh-cut grass from the lawn next door. The warm breeze did nothing to thaw the ice in my veins. I held my phone in my left hand. My right hand gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned entirely white. I had pulled my insurance card from my wallet, traced the customer service number for Blue Cross West Virginia with my index finger, and dialed. I sat on hold for 7 long minutes. The tinny, synthesized version of Vivaldi's Four Seasons looped relentlessly through the car speakers. I closed my eyes and prayed. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. I wanted the insurance representative to tell me that the hospital claim was still pending, that Donovan was telling the truth about the bureaucratic delays, and that I was just a paranoid, ungrateful wife. The music cut out. A woman's voice came on the line. "Thank you for calling claims. My name is Brenda. How can I help you today?" I cleared my throat. "Hi, Brenda. My name is Linnea Price. I'm calling to check the status of a reimbursement for a spinal fusion surgery from last November." I gave her my member identification number and my date of birth. I listened to the clatter of her keyboard. "Okay, ma'am. I have your file open," Brenda said. "I am showing claim number 7741B for the laminectomy and spinal fusion. It looks like that was fully processed and reimbursed." "Reimbursed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "When?" "On February 14th, Brenda said cheerfully. "Valentine's Day. I actually remember your file because I processed a massive batch of surgical claims that holiday week. We issued a direct deposit of $43,285 to the health savings account on file. Can you tell me the last 4 digits of that account?" "Certainly. It ends in 4417. 4417, I repeated. "Are you absolutely sure?" "Yes, ma'am. It shows the transfer cleared successfully. Would you like me to mail you a physical confirmation letter for your records?" I managed to say yes, confirmed my address, and ended the call. I sat in the driver's seat for 11 minutes. I watched the digital clock on the dashboard flip from 1:14 to 1:25. I did not shed a single tear. I did not call my husband to scream at him. I did not call a friend for comfort. Instead, the analytical, methodical part of my brain took complete control. I did the math. $43,285 from the insurance reimbursement, plus $25,900 from the monthly rent transfers. $69,185. Almost $70,000 had vanished into an account I had no access to. He had taken it while I was lying in a hospital bed, learning how to walk down a hallway with a metal walker, and counting my pain pills to make sure I could sleep through the night. Then the memory hit me. February 14th, Valentine's Day. I had been sitting in my hospital room that afternoon. Donovan had walked in wearing a nice sweater, holding a bouquet of bright yellow tulips. He had kissed my cheek, handed me the flowers, and sighed heavily. He had looked deeply into my eyes and said, "I really wish I was taking you out to a nice dinner tonight instead of coming to a hospital room." He said those exact words to me on the very same day that $43,000 of my medical reimbursement flowed directly into his secret bank account. The voice of my mother tried to rise up again, begging me to stay quiet, begging me not to cause a scene, but something fundamental shifted inside my chest. The vocabulary of my marriage completely changed in that parking lot. I was no longer thinking that my husband was acting strangely. I was thinking that my husband was stealing from me. I was no longer trying to find a reasonable explanation to excuse his behavior. I realized there was no acceptable reason on earth for what he had done. I spoke aloud to the empty car, answering the ghost of my mother for the first time in my life. "No." I turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. I put the car in drive, but I did not turn toward our house, and I did not pull back into the clinic parking space. I kept my foot on the brake, opened the internet browser on my phone, and typed 7 words into the search bar. Divorce attorney, Morgantown, West Virginia, fault-based. The first result loaded on the screen. Gorham Family Law, Bet Gorham, Esquire. I pressed the call button and listened to it ring. 3 days after I sat in my car and discovered the missing money, I walked into a brick building on High Street in downtown Morgantown. The wooden stairs groaned under my feet. I pushed open the frosted glass door of Gorham Family Law. Bet Gorham sat behind a massive oak desk covered in neat stacks of manila folders. A wide window behind her offered a sweeping view of the Monongahela River, its muddy brown water moving sluggishly under the bright afternoon sun. The office smelled of aging paper, wooden floorboards, and the bitter bite of dark roast coffee from a French press sitting on a side table. Bet wore her auburn hair in a sharp, angled bob. Reading glasses hung from a delicate silver chain around her neck. She picked them up, placed them on the bridge of her nose to look at a document, and let them drop back against her chest. It was the only nervous habit the woman seemed to possess. I sat in the leather guest chair and told my story. I laid out the accident, the surgery, the missing hospital robe, the restaurant receipt, and finally, the phone call with the insurance representative regarding the $43,000. I kept my hands folded in my lap, anchoring my fingernails into my palms to keep them steady. Bet listened. She did not interrupt. She did not nod sympathetically or offer soft noises of encouragement. She just absorbed the information, her eyes fixed on my face. When I finally stopped talking, the room fell entirely silent except for the low hum of the window air conditioning unit. "What time did he get to the hospital the next morning?" Betta asked. She picked up a silver pen. 8:47, I replied. I was watching the clock. "And what time was your accident?" 11:30 at night. The ambulance arrived around 11:50. Bet set the pen down. 9 hours. Your husband knew his wife was undergoing emergency spinal surgery in the middle of the night, and he came to visit 9 hours later. I looked down at my hands. The leather of the chair squeaked slightly as I shifted my weight. Bet leaned forward, resting her elbows on the oak desk. "I was diagnosed with breast cancer 12 years ago. While I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a mastectomy, my husband told me he was going down to the cafeteria to get a cup of coffee. He disappeared for 6 hours. I found out later he was sleeping with an oncology nurse in a motel 3 miles down the road." She let the words hang in the air, allowing the weight of her history to settle over the desk. "So when I tell you that I understand," Bet said, her voice dropping to a quiet, steady register, "I mean that in the most literal sense possible. I know exactly what it feels like to be abandoned when you are at your absolute weakest." A tight knot that had been sitting in my throat for 5 months suddenly loosened. I swallowed hard, fighting the sudden burn behind my eyes. "Do you want to save this marriage?" Bet asked. I stared out the window at the river. The water kept moving, uncaring and relentless. I thought about the hollow space in my kitchen, the smell of the strange floral perfume on his pillows, and the bank transfers marked as miscellaneous. I do not know, I said honestly. Wrong question, Bet corrected smoothly. She picked her glasses up and let them drop again. Let me ask you a different one. Do you want to get your $43,000 back? Yes. Then that is more than enough to start. Bet opened a fresh legal pad. West Virginia is a fault state. If we can prove adultery, the law bars the at-fault spouse from receiving alimony. We also have a clear case of dissipation of marital assets. Your husband took your medical reimbursement and $25,000 of joint funds to pay for an apartment. The court will credit every single penny of that back to your side of the ledger during the equitable distribution of property. You could walk away with 65% of the total assets. She tapped the silver pen against the paper. But we need bulletproof evidence. Concrete, documented, undeniable proof. Not just a hunch, not just a receipt from a chain restaurant. How do I get that? I asked. Step 1 is doing absolutely nothing. You cannot let him know that you suspect a thing. Step 2 involves my forensic accountant. Step 3 is making a choice when we hand you the final binder. Bet paused, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. If he lied about where he was the night of your accident, a private investigator can pull the traffic camera records from the Department of Transportation. The cameras along Route 19 catch every license plate. The state only keeps those records for 18 months, so we are on a ticking clock. If his car was on the road that night instead of parked at his office, the cameras will show exactly where he was. I agreed to the terms. My spine throbbed a dull warning as I stood up, but my steps felt lighter walking back down the wooden stairs to the street. 2 full weeks passed. Every morning, I made Donovan his coffee. Every evening, I asked him how his day went. I smiled. I listened to his complaints about his pharmaceutical sales targets. I played the role of the recovering, grateful wife, while a cold, watchful presence grew stronger inside my ribs. Then, Donovan packed a small duffel bag. My territory keeps expanding, he told me, kissing the top of my head in the kitchen. I have to cover a massive client network in Virginia for the next 2 days. I will be back late tomorrow night. I watched his sedan pull out of the driveway. I waited until the taillights disappeared around the bend of our suburban street. Then I turned around, walked upstairs, and went straight into his home office. I had never been the kind of woman to snoop. My mother had raised me to respect boundaries, to keep my head down, and to trust the people who provided for the family. But the woman my mother raised had died in a flipped car on Route 19. The office smelled like stale coffee beans and the crisp, masculine aftershave he wore to corporate meetings. His mahogany desk sat in the center of the room. I did not have to hack into anything. Donovan was a man entirely blinded by his own arrogance. He never believed I would dare to look. I opened the top right drawer. It was filled with standard office supplies, loose pens, and a small black box meant for paper clips. I picked up the box. It rattled, but the sound was too light for metal clips. I popped the lid off. 2 tiny plastic squares sat at the bottom, prepaid cellular subscriber identity module cards. I set them down and pulled open the bottom filing drawer. Most of the folders held old tax returns and warranty manuals, but tucked all the way in the back, beneath a stack of blank printer paper, lay a folded document. I pulled it out and smoothed the pages flat on the surface of his desk. It was a residential lease agreement. The property was a 1-bedroom apartment located in Fairmont, a town about 30 minutes away. The monthly rent was exactly $1,850. I moved my finger down to the signature line. The primary tenant was listed as Callaway S. Right below that, on the line designated for the financial guarantor, was my husband's messy, looping signature. Price D. Fairmont. He had set up a completely separate domestic life in a town far enough away to avoid running into our neighbors, but close enough to visit on a long lunch break. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and took clear, steady photographs of every single page of the lease, capturing the signatures and the dates. I took a picture of the tiny plastic cards in the paperclip box. I put everything back exactly where I found it, ensuring the printer paper covered the lease just as before. I sat down in his leather desk chair and opened my laptop. The silence of the empty house pressed against my ears. I opened a search engine and navigated to a professional networking site. I typed in the name, S. Callaway, Fairmont, West Virginia. The results loaded instantly. The top profile belonged to Shay Callaway. Her job title was listed as Pharmaceutical Sales Representative at PharmaCorp. She worked for the exact same company as my husband. She was his direct subordinate. I clicked on her picture. A young woman smiled back at me. She was 31 years old. With bright blonde hair styled in loose waves and flawless makeup, she wore a tailored blazer over a silk blouse, projecting a polished, youthful confidence. I stared at her face for 4 full minutes. I tried to find something evil in her eyes, something monstrous that would explain how a person could help a man drain his injured wife's medical funds, but she just looked ordinary. She looked like a girl who wore a sweet, floral perfume, the exact same perfume I had smelled on my husband's pillows in the dead of night. I did not cry. The tears simply refused to come. Instead, my chest filled with a strange, expansive clarity. The fog of confusion that had plagued me for months burned away in an instant. I opened the notepad application on my computer. I typed the name Shay Calloway at the top of the blank page. Beneath her name, I typed the date of my accident. Then I began to construct a timeline, placing every late night, every forgotten hospital robe, and every missing dollar into perfect chronological order. 3 days later, I sat across from Bet Gorham once again. The afternoon sun glared off the surface of the Monongahela River outside her window. Bet slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the oak desk. It was the formal retainer agreement. My upfront fee is $5,000, Bet said, watching my face carefully. I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook. For 9 years, all of my earnings from the physical therapy clinic had gone straight into the joint checking account Donovan controlled. But I had always kept a small, separate savings account at a local credit union. It was a meager safety net, built slowly over years of depositing small holiday bonuses and leftover grocery cash. Donovan knew nothing about it because he only ever monitored the accounts he could access from his phone. I clicked my pen and wrote out the amount, $5,000. I signed my name at the bottom. Writing that check was the first time in nearly a decade that I had spent a significant amount of money exclusively for my own protection. It felt like breaking the surface of a frozen lake and finally taking a massive breath of air. I tore the check from the booklet and handed it across the desk, along with the printed photographs of the lease agreement and the woman's social media profile. Bet reviewed the documents, her silver pen tapping a steady rhythm against the wood. Calloway, direct subordinate. This is a massive violation of pharmaceutical corporate policy. On top of the marital betrayal, she placed the photos into a fresh manila folder. I want to introduce you to the man who will be handling the money trail. His name is Nash Penrod. He is a forensic accountant, and he is the absolute best in the state at tracking hidden assets. You will not need to meet with him directly. I will relay all of his findings to you. What exactly is he going to do? I asked. Nash is going to serve a subpoena on the bank holding account 4417, Bet explained. He will trace every single transaction your husband has made over the last 18 months. He will cross-reference that spending with the medical timeline you provided. We are going to build a paper trail so dense your husband will drown in it. I nodded, digesting the plan. How long will that take? 2 to 3 weeks, Bet said. She took off her reading glasses and leaned forward, holding my gaze. And this is the hardest part, Linnea. While Nash is digging, you have to go home and live your normal life. You cook dinner. You ask him about his day. You kiss your husband good morning if you have to. You give him absolutely no reason to panic or hide his tracks. My stomach twisted violently at the thought of smiling at him across the kitchen table, knowing he was paying the rent for a blonde woman 30 miles away. I do not know if I can do that. Looking at him makes me feel sick. Bet softened her voice. You are a physical therapist? How many patients have you taught to endure agonizing pain because the pain was necessary for their muscles to heal? I thought of Harold, an elderly stroke survivor who had cried in my arms because the leg exercises hurt too much. I had told him the pain had a purpose. Dozens, I murmured. This is your recovery, Bet said firmly. You have to endure the pain right now so you can be strong enough to walk away later. I stood up from the leather chair. The tight, pulling sensation along my surgical scar reminded me that I was still healing, but my legs felt solid beneath me. I can do it, I told her. I walked out of the office and descended the wooden stairs to the street level. I pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The late spring air felt warm against my skin. The sunlight caught the ripples of the river in the distance, casting bright, blinding flashes of white light. I stood on the pavement for a long moment, watching the cars drive past. For 9 years, I had walked through the world with my eyes intentionally closed, choosing the comfort of blind trust over the harsh reality of the truth. Today, my eyes were wide open. The world looked vastly different. The colors were sharper. The air felt colder. The shadows were deeper. I had crossed a threshold, stepping out of the life of an obedient, enduring wife, and into something entirely new. I knew the truth now, and knowing the truth meant it was entirely impossible to ever go back. 3 weeks of performing the role of a happy, oblivious wife felt like swallowing broken glass. I made the morning coffee. I folded his laundry. I listened to Donovan complain about his demanding pharmaceutical sales quotas. I smiled when he kissed my cheek before leaving for work. Every single morning, I stood in my kitchen and played my part perfectly, holding on to the cold, sharp truth buried deep inside my chest. Then, Bet Gorham called me back to her office. The thick black binder hit the surface of her heavy oak desk with a loud, definitive thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Outside her window, the Monongahela River looked dark and swollen from the recent spring rain. Nash finished the financial trace, Bet said. She did not bother with small talk or gentle pleasantries. She opened the binder, her silver pen resting lightly between her fingers. The account ending in 4417 is a personal checking account in your husband's name. He opened it at First Exchange Bank. That is not a bank we use, I said, leaning forward in the leather guest chair. Exactly. And it is located in Fairmont, not Morgantown, a different town entirely, 30 minutes away, somewhere nobody knows him. Bet flipped the first heavy page. The money flowing into the account consists of direct transfers from your joint savings, plus the $43,000 medical reimbursement from Blue Cross. The money flowing out tells the entire story. She tapped a printed spreadsheet. Let us start with the rent. $1,850 a month, paid directly to a property management company in Fairmont for Shay Calloway's apartment. He has been paying it for 18 months. That is $33,300. I looked at the black ink on the white paper. $33,000. That was nearly half my yearly salary at the physical therapy clinic. Next, Bet continued, her voice clinical and completely detached. $4,200 at K Jewelers in Fairmont. I involuntarily reached a hand up to my collarbone. It was completely bare. My plain wedding band was the only piece of jewelry I wore on a daily basis. Donovan had not bought me a necklace or a pair of earrings since Piper was born, 8 years ago. I pictured a young, blonde woman opening a small velvet box, smiling up at my husband. A wave of raw, primitive grief hit the back of my throat, tasting like copper and salt. I swallowed it down forcefully, refusing to let it break my composure. There is more, Betta said gently, watching my face. $2,800 to the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs. 2 nights. I squeezed my eyes shut. I remembered that specific weekend. It was late October. I had been working overtime at the clinic to cover a coworker on maternity leave. Donovan told me he was attending a mandatory regional sales conference. I had spent that Saturday night eating leftover pasta at the kitchen table, helping Piper with her spelling homework, while my husband drank expensive wine at a luxury resort 2 hours south. And then there are the restaurants. Betta turned another page. Nash documented 87 separate transactions. Applebee's, Olive Garden, TGI Fridays. The average cost was about $16.50 a meal. I sat perfectly still. The silence in the office stretched out, broken only by the steady ticking of the wall clock. 10 seconds passed. 87, I whispered. Yes, Betty said softly. I thought about the crumpled receipt I had found in the pocket of my gray fleece robe in the parking garage. That single piece of paper was just one out of 87. 87 dinners. 87 times Donovan had looked me in the eye and said he had to work late, or meet a client, or finish a quarterly report. It was not a grand, swept-away romance. It was cheap chicken strips and side salads at chain restaurants along the highway. It was an everyday, persistent, methodical betrayal squeezed into the margins of his workday. Finally, Bet pointed to the last line, $680 to Verizon for a second cellular phone plan, active for the last 18 months. She closed the binder. The documented spending from the Fairmont account totals $78,295. All of this happened while you were lying in a hospital bed, learning how to walk again, and paying the family mortgage with your paycheck. I placed both of my hands flat on the wooden desk. The coolness of the surface grounded me. The wave of grief was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp precision. I felt like a surgeon looking at a very clear medical scan. Bet, I said, my voice completely steady. The $43,000 from the health savings account. That was insurance money paid out for my specific surgical case. For my spine, for the titanium disc currently holding my lower back together. He took the money meant for my broken bones, and he used it to rent her an apartment. Bet met my eyes. She did not offer me pity. She offered me pure strategy. Write down exactly how that makes you feel, Linnea. Keep a journal. Because when we stand in front of the judge, that is exactly what the court is going to hear. A week later, I sat up late in my dark bedroom. Donovan was asleep beside me, his steady breathing filling the quiet space. I had my laptop open on my knees, the screen brightness turned down to the lowest possible setting. I was reading through the digital files Nash had securely transferred to me. Along with the bank statements, the forensic accountant had pulled the metadata and transaction notes from Donovan's mobile banking history. Many banking applications allow users to attach text snippets or digital memos to peer-to-peer transfers. By tracing the digital footprint attached to the second phone line, Nash had uncovered a cache of saved messages. This was not illegal surveillance or computer hacking. This was purely financial discovery, the digital trail left behind by a man too arrogant to cover his tracks. I clicked open a folder containing screenshots of the text messages. The first message was dated November 17th, the night of my car accident, the night my spine was shattered on Route 19. It was a message from Donovan to Shay. It read, "She asked me to bring her robe. I forgot. Was at your place. Can you remind me tomorrow? I will grab it on my way to the hospital." My breath caught in my chest. He had been at her apartment. When I was bleeding in the overturned car, waiting for the ambulance in the freezing rain, he was at her apartment. I clicked the next image. Same night, a few hours later, a message from Shay to Donovan. "Is she going to be okay?" Donovan replied, "Yeah, surgery went fine. Might go see her in the morning. Miss you. Coming back now. Might." I stared at that single word until the letters blurred together. Might go see her. His wife had just survived an emergency spinal fusion, and going to the hospital was merely a possibility. Returning to his mistress was the priority. The cruelty of that single word was a physical blow, heavier than the impact of the concrete median that had crushed my car. I scrolled down to a message dated 3 months later. It was from Shay. "My mom keeps asking when I will find someone good," she wrote. "If she knew you were married when we started, she would never speak to me again," Donovan answered 3 minutes later. "She will not find out. By the time we are official, the divorce will be done and your mom will never know the timeline." I read Shay's message again. I thought about the woman I had never met, Frances Calloway, a mother who loved her daughter, a mother who was being actively protected from the truth through a web of lies. Shay knew Donovan was married from the very beginning, and she was lying to her own mother to preserve her image as the good daughter. I realized then that I was not the only victim in this story. Frances was being deceived just as completely as I was. She just did not know it yet. My cell phone vibrated silently on the nightstand. It was 10 o'clock at night. The caller identification showed Bet Gorham. I picked up the phone, slipped quietly out of the bedroom, and walked down the hall to the guest bathroom. I closed the door and answered. "Bet?" I whispered. "Is everything okay?" "I know it is late," Bet said, her voice raspy. "I have a habit of working at night, leftover insomnia from my chemotherapy days. I was reviewing Nash's final report on the text messages, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." I sat on the edge of the cold porcelain bathtub. "I am reading them right now. It is a lot to process," she said. "He told her he might come to the hospital," I said, staring at the bathroom tiles. "He said might," Bet sighed, a soft, staticky sound through the receiver. When I found out my husband was sleeping with the nurse, the affair itself was not the thing that broke me. The most painful part was realizing that I had been lying to myself for 3 years. I knew something was wrong. I saw the signs, but I actively chose not to see them because seeing them meant my entire life had to change. I stayed completely silent. I gripped the edge of the bathtub tightly. She was speaking the exact thoughts that had been haunting me since the day I found the restaurant receipt. I had known, deep down, somewhere beneath the physical therapy routines and the household chores, I had known Donovan was gone. I had just been too terrified to look. "You are not crazy, Linnea," Bet told me softly before hanging up. "Your instincts were right the entire time." 2 weeks later, the final piece of the puzzle fell into my hands. It was early Sunday morning. The house was quiet, save for the sound of the shower running in the master bathroom. Steam rolled lazily out from beneath the bathroom door. Donovan took long, luxurious showers. I knew his routine perfectly, and I knew I had exactly 15 minutes. His gray windbreaker jacket was draped over the back of the armchair in the corner of the bedroom. I walked over to the chair. My heart pounded against my ribs, loud and frantic, like a trapped bird. I reached into the inner breast pocket. It was completely empty. I moved my hands to the outer side pockets. My fingers brushed against a hard, rectangular object. I pulled it out. It was a cheap, prepaid Samsung smartphone. It had no protective case and no decorative cover. It was entirely unremarkable, and it was absolutely not the expensive Apple device Donovan used for work and family. The screen was black. I stood frozen, listening to the water hitting the porcelain tub in the next room. He was singing a low, off-key song under the spray. I did not try to unlock the device. I did not need to see the messages inside. I already had the bank records and the digital metadata. I pulled my own phone from my pajama pocket, flipped the cheap Samsung over, and took a clear photograph of the back. I captured the manufacturer model number, the International Mobile Equipment Identity Code printed on the small white sticker, and the Verizon prepaid logo. I slipped the phone back into the exact pocket where I had found it. I smoothed the fabric of the jacket, picked up my laundry basket, and walked calmly out of the bedroom. I went straight to the downstairs half bathroom, locked the door, and sent the photograph to Bet. Her reply came through 2 minutes later. We do not need to open the phone. We need the records. Nash will use this serial number to subpoena the cellular provider when we file the case. But the most important thing is the existence of the device itself. Having a second phone equals having a second life. The court will infer everything they need to know. That afternoon, the sky over Morgantown turned a bruised, heavy purple. Rain began to fall in thick, relentless sheets, beating against the living room windows. Donovan walked down the stairs wearing a polo shirt and khaki slacks, carrying a large golf umbrella. I am heading out to the country club, he announced, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. I promised one of the regional directors I would play a round of golf with him today. I will probably be back after dinner. I looked past his shoulder, out the window. The weather application on my phone had predicted severe thunderstorms all day. Nobody was playing golf in this weather. Have fun, I said smoothly. Drive safe. I stood by the window and watched him walk to his car. The rain washed over the glass, blurring the shape of his sedan. I watched the red taillights illuminate as he shifted into reverse, backing out of the driveway and disappearing down the wet street. The surgical scar on the back of my neck began to itch fiercely. I reached a hand up and scratched it. I did not try to hide the raised, uneven tissue under my collar. I let my fingers trace the physical reminder of the night my life broke apart. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my phone, and called my lawyer. I am ready, I said as soon as Betta answered. I have all the financial proof. I have the texts. I have the second phone. What is the next step? The final piece of the puzzle, Bet replied, her voice crackling with electric focus. The traffic cameras. The cameras from the highway? Yes. The night of your accident. Nash is pulling the Department of Transportation records for Route 19 right now. Your husband told you he was at his office in Morgantown when you crashed. But if his car was caught on a traffic camera heading south toward Fairmont that night, instead of parked at work, Bet paused, letting the implication hang in the heavy air between us. If the cameras caught him on the road, she finished, then we have absolutely everything we need to burn his world to the ground. Bet Gorham reached across her wide oak desk and pulled the plastic cord, snapping the window blinds shut. The afternoon sunlight vanished, plunging the office into heavy shadows. She opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. The pale, artificial glow illuminated the sharp lines of her face. Nash had delivered the Department of Transportation records. The state highway cameras along Route 19 capture every single vehicle traveling the corridor between Morgantown and Fairmont, Bet explained, her voice low and clinical in the dim room. The footage is grainy, mostly black and white at night, but the license plate readers are highly accurate. Nash pulled the records for the night of November 17th, the night of your accident. She pressed a button on her keyboard. A video file began to play. The screen showed a dark stretch of highway illuminated only by the glaring headlights of passing cars. A timestamp blinked steadily in the bottom right corner. 11:43 at night. A white sedan sped into the frame, passing under the camera. The software paused the video, zoomed in on the rear bumper, and sharpened the image of the license plate. It was Donovan's car, a 2021 luxury sedan. Camera 0719, Bet said, reading from a printed report. Located at milepost 14, heading south toward Fairmont. His vehicle was clocked at 67 miles per hour. She clicked to the next file. 11:47 at night. Camera at milepost 11, 3 miles further south. Same car, still heading toward Fairmont. I stared at the glowing screen. My mouth felt dry, as if I had swallowed dust. My accident happened at milepost 16, I said, reciting the details from the police report I had memorized months ago. At 11:43. Yes, Bet said gently. Milepost 16 is 2 miles north of the first camera. Your husband drove past the exact location of your accident, right before the camera caught him. He was on the same stretch of road, heading the same direction. I did not say anything. The air in the room suddenly felt too thin to breathe. Bet opened a thin manila folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a printed log from the County Emergency Dispatch Center. This is the 911 call record from that night, Bet said. I looked down at the paper. The emergency call was received at 11:47. The caller reported a single vehicle accident on Route 19, near milepost 16. The log noted that the caller provided an accurate location, described an overturned vehicle in the median, and specifically stated that a woman was inside and not moving. I traced my finger down to the caller identification line. The phone number listed was not my husband's cell phone. It was an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Whose number is this? I asked, though my stomach was already sinking with the inevitable answer. It is registered to Shay Calloway, Bet said. Her primary cell phone, based in Fairmont. I looked up from the paper, my mind struggling to piece the impossible logistics together. Did he call the police from her phone? Or did she call them? Nash and I reconstructed the timeline based on his data usage, Betty explained, leaning back in her leather chair. If your husband was driving through the heavy rain at 11:43, he likely had his phone mounted on the dashboard. The data records show a continuous video call active during that exact window. He was on a video call with Shay while he was driving to her apartment. When he witnessed the accident, his phone was occupied, so he told her what he saw, and she dialed 911 from her end, or he used her phone to call as soon as he pulled into her driveway. She tapped the bottom of the dispatch log. Read the dispatcher notes. I squinted at the small text. The caller sounded panicked, stated he witnessed the accident occur while driving. He saw it, Bet said softly. He saw your car hit the median. He knew exactly what vehicle you drive. He called for an ambulance, and then he kept his foot on the gas pedal. He did not stop. My hands gripped the wooden edge of the desk. The knuckles turned entirely white. The thick, raised scar tissue on the back of my neck began to itch fiercely, a sensation like tiny needles pressing directly into my spinal cord. I focused on my breathing. I counted 4 seconds for the inhale, holding it, and releasing it over 7 seconds. It was the exact grounding technique I taught my physical therapy patients when they experienced a sudden panic attack. I sat in the dark office and pictured the night of November 17th, the freezing rain drumming against the cracked windshield, the smell of deployed airbags and burning rubber, the terrifying, paralyzing realization that my legs would not move. I had been trapped inside an overturned car in the dark, bleeding, waiting for 5 agonizing minutes before the sirens finally wailed in the distance. During those 5 minutes, my husband was continuing his drive to his mistress's apartment. What kind of force keeps a man sitting comfortably in the driver's seat when he sees his own wife's car crushed against a concrete barrier? It was not pure evil. It was not burning hatred. It was something infinitely worse than both of those things combined. It was complete, chilling indifference. He had made a calculation in the span of a few seconds. He knew the ambulance would eventually arrive, and he decided he simply did not need to be the person standing in the rain waiting for it. He drove to Shay's bed, slept through the night, and then walked into my intensive care unit at 8:47 the next morning with red eyes, claiming his office phone had died. For the very first time since I found the restaurant receipt, I completely stopped caring about the stolen money. Bet, I said, my voice sounding hollow and unfamiliar to my own ears. I want to file the papers. Fault-based divorce? She asked, picking up her silver pen. Fault-based. Dissipation of assets. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. All of it. He will know you know, Bet warned. Good. Bet nodded slowly. I need you to wait just a little longer, Linnea. Do not confront him yet. Do not let him know we are coming. Let me prepare the entire filing packet. When the court receives the petition, he will be served with the papers at the exact same time. The element of surprise is absolutely critical in cases involving hidden financial assets. I released my grip on the desk and stood up. My spine ached, a deep and permanent reminder of the man I had married. I can wait, I told her. I have already waited 9 years. I truly intended to wait. I had the patience and the discipline to maintain the facade, but my plan changed 2 weeks later, not because I lost my temper, but because my 8-year-old daughter asked a question I could no longer answer with silence. We were sitting at the kitchen table eating dinner. Donovan was working late again. Piper pushed her green beans around her plate with a plastic fork, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Mommy," she said quietly, "why does Daddy smell different when he comes home late?" I froze, my own fork hovering halfway to my mouth. Children have sharper senses than adults, untainted by the complex rationalizations we use to ignore the truth. Piper had smelled the sweet, floral notes of Marc Jacobs' daisy lingering on her father's clothes. She recognized that the scent did not belong to me, and it did not belong to our house. That night, after Piper was fast asleep in her room, I left the hallway lights burning brightly. I sat down on the living room sofa. I placed the thick black evidence binder directly in the center of the glass coffee table. This was not a careless mistake. It was a deliberate, staged presentation. Donovan unlocked the front door just past 11 o'clock. He stepped into the entryway, shaking the spring rain from his jacket. "Linnea?" he called out, sounding surprised to see the lights on. "Why are you still awake?" "Come sit down, Donovan," I said. He walked into the living room, his casual smile already firmly in place. Then his eyes fell on the massive black binder sitting on the glass table. A micro-expression flashed across his face, lasting less than a second. His eyes narrowed, and the muscle in his jaw twitched violently. Then the mask slid right back up. His smile shifted into an expression of deep, loving concern. "What is all this?" he asked, pointing to the binder. "Account 4417, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. $43,285 from my health savings account. $33,300 to a property management company in Fairmont for Shay Calloway's apartment. $4,200 in jewelry. $2,800 for a weekend at the Greenbrier. 87 restaurant dinners." Dead silence filled the living room. The rain tapped gently against the window panes. "The Department of Transportation traffic cameras on Route 19, I continued, unblinking. "Your car, 11:43 at night, heading south toward Fairmont." "Linnea," he started, his voice thick and urgent. "A 911 call from Shay Calloway's registered cell phone," I said, cutting him off completely. "At 11:47. Exactly 4 minutes after you drove past my flipped car." "Stop!" Donovan commanded, his volume suddenly rising. He stood up from the armchair, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. The cornered animal inside him panicked, and the frantic defense mechanisms immediately activated. "That bank account is purely for business expenses," he said rapidly, pacing across the rug. "You are reading the statements entirely wrong. You do not understand how corporate expense routing works." I simply watched him. "You are being completely paranoid," he continued, pivoting his strategy when the business excuse failed to land. "Those painkillers they prescribed you after the surgery have seriously messed with your head. You are seeing conspiracies everywhere. You need to talk to a therapist, Linnea. Honestly, I am extremely worried about your mental health right now." He stopped pacing and pointed a finger at me, his face flushing red. "I am the one who managed the finances while you were lying in a hospital bed. I am the one who ran back and forth, keeping this house from falling apart. And now you have the absolute nerve to sit here and accuse me?" He ran out of breath. He stood panting in the center of the room, waiting for me to scream, or cry, or apologize for doubting him. I did none of those things. I let the silence stretch out until it became suffocating. When he finally looked away, unable to hold my gaze, I spoke one single sentence. "Traffic cameras do not get paranoid, Donovan." The fight drained out of his body in a sudden, catastrophic rush. The false victory arrived exactly as Betty had predicted. He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook as he began to sob loudly. "I am so sorry," he wept, dropping to his knees on the rug right in front of me. "I am so incredibly sorry, Linnea. It was a massive mistake. It meant absolutely nothing. It is already over. I ended things with her last month. I swear to God. Please, please forgive me." He reached out and grabbed my hands. He promised to cut off all contact with Shay immediately. He promised to close the secret bank account the very next morning. He promised to attend couples therapy, to go to church, to do whatever it took to rebuild our marriage. A treacherous, deeply ingrained part of my psychology wanted to believe him, The woman who had spent her entire life taking care of sick people wanted to comfort the weeping man on the floor. He was begging for my help. He needed me. The ghost of my mother screamed at me to be the bigger person, to be the good wife, to forgive and forget for the sake of the family. I gently pulled my hands out of his grasp. I need time, I told him quietly. Donovan nodded frantically, wiping his wet face. He stood up, kissed the top of my forehead with trembling lips, and walked upstairs to the bedroom. I stayed on the sofa. I picked up my cell phone, opened my messages, and typed a quick text to my lawyer. He knows that I know, I wrote. He says he is going to stop. Bet replied a minute later. He will not stop, her message read. He will just learn how to hide his tracks much better. The document preparation continues. For one entire week, our house functioned under a bizarre, fragile peace. Donovan came home from the office exactly at 5 o'clock every single evening. He brought me fresh flowers. He cooked dinner, a chore he had not volunteered to do in 2 years. He sat on the floor and played board games with Piper until her bedtime. I desperately wanted to lean into the illusion. I wanted the nightmare to be over. But then the weekend arrived. I opened my laptop on Saturday morning to check the balance of our primary joint account to pay the water bill. My saved password failed. I tried again. The system locked me out, stating the security credentials had been recently updated. I found Donovan in the garage, organizing his tools. Did you change the bank passwords? I asked casually, leaning against the doorframe. I need to look at the statements to pay the utility bills this month. He did not look up from the wrench in his hand. Oh, yeah. I am in the middle of cleaning all of our digital security up, consolidating the accounts. Just give me a few weeks to sort it out, and I will give you the new logins. Cleaning things up. Those 3 words told me vastly more than the traffic cameras or the restaurant receipts ever could. He was not consolidating our security. He was systematically deleting the evidence. He was locking me out of my own money to ensure I could never print another statement. He believed his tears had bought him enough time to bury the truth permanently. I turned around and walked back into the kitchen. I did not argue with him. I did not demand the passwords. I pulled my phone from my pocket and typed a message to Bet. File the papers now. Her reply was instantaneous. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Magistrate Court of Monongalia County. The element of surprise is back in play. On Tuesday morning, exactly at 9 o'clock, Bet Gorham filed the formal petition for a fault-based divorce at the Monongalia County Courthouse. By Thursday afternoon, the legal machinery finally caught up to my husband. I was not there to see it, but in a town like Morgantown, information flows faster than the river. A receptionist at the pharmaceutical office later gossiped to one of my clinic coworkers, who then relayed the scene to me. A woman with short hair, wearing a bright green raincoat, walked directly past the front desk and approached Donovan. She handed him a thick manila envelope and spoke 4 words. You have been served. Donovan stood in the middle of his office and stared at the envelope. He remained completely silent for 4 full seconds. He did not yell. He did not cause a scene. He simply turned around, walked out to his car, and drove straight to our house. I was not at home. I was sitting safely in Bet's office, drinking black coffee and watching the brown water of the Monongahela River roll past the window. Donovan was no longer the weeping, apologetic husband kneeling on the living room rug. That version of him vanished the moment he realized his tears had not worked. The cornered animal took over, shifting immediately into pure survival mode. Over the next 48 hours, he launched a calculated, aggressive counterstrike. His first move was legal. He hired Marshall Tate, a high-profile defense attorney from Charleston, who specialized in protecting high-income earners in messy divorces. Tate wasted absolutely no time. He filed a blistering counterclaim demanding a 50-50 split of joint custody. He completely denied the dissipation of assets, and then he dropped the real bomb. Tate formally requested a court-ordered drug test, claiming I was emotionally unstable and suffering from long-term opioid abuse following my spinal surgery. I stared at the paperwork on Bet's desk, my vision blurring with a sudden, hot rage. My doctor had prescribed me standard pain medication for exactly 3 months after the hospital released me. I had stopped taking the pills completely by April. He wants a drug test, I said, my voice shaking with a fury I had never felt before. I have to prove I am not a drug addict simply because my husband abandoned me? Tate is playing a very specific card, Bet said, her voice remaining perfectly level. He knows you are clean. He knows the test will come back negative. But demanding the test automatically delays the proceedings by 6 to 8 weeks. He is trying to starve you out, Linnea. He wants you exhausted. The second blow came through our social circle. Donovan began making phone calls. I shared a mutual friend group with him, couples we had known for years. A narrative began to circulate through the community. Donovan told everyone that I was having a mental breakdown, that the trauma of the car accident had changed my personality, and that I was obsessing over wild conspiracy theories. My phone buzzed on a Friday evening. It was a text message from Alma, a woman I had hosted for Thanksgiving dinner 3 years in a row. "We love you both so much," the message read. "Donovan says you are going through a really dark time right now. If you need to talk to someone, I am here." I stared at the glowing screen. I did not reply. I deleted the message and placed the phone face down on the kitchen counter. But the third strike was the one that finally brought me to my knees. The knock on our front door came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A woman in her late 40s stood on the porch holding a metal clipboard. She introduced herself as Andrea Folks. She was a social worker with the State Child Protective Services Division. "We received an anonymous report," Andrea said, her eyes neutral and entirely unreadable. The caller stated that a child in this home might be at risk due to the mother's erratic behavior and substance abuse issues. "I am required by law to perform an unannounced home inspection." The air completely left my lungs. The world tilted sideways. I stepped back and let her inside, my hands trembling so violently I had to press them against my thighs to hide the shaking. Andrea walked through my house. She opened my refrigerator and noted the fresh vegetables and the gallons of milk. She inspected Piper's bedroom, observing the clean laundry folded on the dresser. Then, she asked to speak to my daughter alone in the living room. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the granite counter, listening to the muffled voices. "Mommy is fine," I heard my 8-year-old daughter say clearly. "She makes me breakfast every single morning. She helps me with my spelling words. She smells like clean laundry." 10 minutes later, Andrea Folks returned to the kitchen. She made a final note on her clipboard. "The investigation will take 30 days to formally close. Until then, the file remains open. Documentation is your best friend right now, Mrs. Price." She walked out the front door. The latch clicked shut. I slid slowly down the front of the kitchen cabinets. My knees hit the cold linoleum floor, and I sat there in the quiet house, completely broken. Someone had called the state and accused me of abusing my child. I was the mother who had carried a feverish toddler to the emergency room at 3 in the morning. I was the woman who had turned down a clinic promotion because the new hours would mean missing her school plays. I had spent 3 months in a surgical recovery bed, fighting through agonizing nerve pain just so I could be strong enough to walk her to the school bus again. And someone had picked up a phone and called me a danger to my own flesh and blood. My phone rang. The sharp sound startled me in the empty kitchen. I answered it without looking at the screen. "I traced the origin of the report," Bet said immediately. The call was placed anonymously, but it flagged the exact same opioid abuse narrative that Marshall Tate is pushing in court. West Virginia Code penalizes false reporting. "This is a retaliatory strike, Linnea." "They might take her," I whispered, my voice cracking. "If he keeps lying, they might take Piper." "They will absolutely not take your daughter," Bet commanded, her tone slicing through my panic like a sharp blade. "Listen to me carefully. This is incredibly good news. Your husband is panicking. People in a state of panic make careless, stupid mistakes. He filed a divorce counterclaim demanding a drug test, and suddenly an anonymous caller reports you for drug abuse in the same week. When Judge Harlan looks at this timeline, she will not see a concerned father. She will see a coordinated campaign of retaliation." I wanted to believe her, but the slow, agonizing erosion of my life had already begun. Over the next 3 weeks, the pressure became a physical weight. At the physical therapy clinic, the atmosphere turned toxic. Morgantown is a small community, and the rumors had spread fast. When I walked into the staff break room, conversations abruptly stopped. 2 of my fellow therapists began finding excuses to avoid working the same shift with me. I overheard a whispered conversation near the supply closet about my supposed pill problem. I remembered Bet telling me not to engage, so I kept my head down, treated my patients, and documented every single hostile interaction in a small notebook. The financial squeeze tightened next. Marshall Tate filed an emergency motion to freeze all of our joint checking and savings accounts pending the final custody hearing. The court approved the temporary hold. Suddenly, my access to the family money was entirely gone. I was forced to live strictly on my bi-weekly clinic paycheck and the small personal savings account I had hidden away. The budget was suffocatingly tight. I started buying cheaper groceries and turned the thermostat down to save on the heating bill. The most agonizing part was the living arrangement. Under state law, I could not force Donovan to leave the marital home without a formal judge's order, so we lived together under the same roof like ghosts. He slept on the sofa in the living room. I slept upstairs. We moved through the kitchen in total silence, carefully avoiding eye contact. Piper was caught directly in the crossfire. She started having terrible nightmares. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, terrified of shadows in her closet. One afternoon, I received a phone call from her third-grade teacher. "Piper asked me a question today during recess," the teacher said gently. She asked me, "If a mom and a dad get a divorce, who does the kid have to choose?" I walked into Piper's bedroom later that evening and found a new drawing sitting on her desk. She had drawn our house again, but this time, a thick red crayon line slashed straight down the middle of the paper, dividing the house in half. I was standing on the left side. Donovan was standing on the right. Piper had drawn herself standing directly on top of the jagged red line. 1 week later, I hit the absolute bottom. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting on the edge of Piper's narrow bed. She had just woken up from another nightmare, crying out for me in the dark. I held her small, warm body against my chest and rocked her back and forth. I hummed a soft melody, a song called "You Are My Sunshine." It was the exact same song my own mother used to sing to me when I cared for her during her chronic illness flare-ups. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. My mother had sung to me to mask her pain, and now I was singing to my daughter to mask mine. The room smelled faintly of lavender baby shampoo. A small nightlight cast a yellow glow against the wall. Piper's breathing finally slowed, evening out as she drifted back to sleep. I gently laid her head back onto the pillow. Bending over the mattress sent a vicious spasm of pain through my fused lower vertebrae. I stood up and walked out into the dark hallway. I stopped and stood completely still in the shadows. To my left was my daughter's room. To my right was the master bedroom. Straight ahead was the staircase leading down to the living room, where my husband was sleeping. A heavy, suffocating doubt settled over my shoulders. I asked myself if I was doing the right thing. I had $78,000 worth of documented financial theft. I had the traffic camera footage. I had the emergency dispatch call. The evidence was entirely real, but the cost of fighting was destroying everything around me. My daughter was suffering from night terrors. My friends had abandoned me. My coworkers avoided me. State investigators were questioning my fitness as a mother. I was surviving on $3,000 a month while Donovan utilized a ruthless corporate lawyer and his undeniable charm to control the narrative. If I simply stopped fighting, the pressure would end. If I called Bette in the morning and told her to withdraw the petition, we could agree to a quiet settlement. Donovan would win, but Piper's nightmares would probably stop. The social worker would go away. The frozen bank accounts would open back up. Life would return to a comfortable, familiar state of normal. Normal meant living with a man who lied as easily as he breathed. Normal meant raising a daughter in a house where the truth was a buried secret. The ghost of my mother whispered loudly in my ear. She told me that good women do not complain. She told me that strong women endure the pain to keep their families together. She had held our family together through pure, silent suffering, and part of me desperately wanted to follow her exact path. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I thought about finding Marshall Tate's office number. I thought about surrendering. Then, I looked down at my hands in the dim light. I saw the wide palms and the short fingers. I saw the thick calluses formed by years of manipulating the broken limbs of my patients. I thought about a man named Harold. He was a 74-year-old stroke survivor I had treated the previous year. During his 16th week of physical therapy, Harold had collapsed onto the parallel bars, crying in frustration. He told me the pain was too much, and he wanted to quit. I remembered exactly what I had told him. "Harold, this pain has a very specific purpose. If you stop moving right now, you will never know if you can walk again." Harold eventually walked out of that clinic on his own 2 feet. I did not march boldly back to my bedroom. My legs gave out, and I slid down the hallway wall, sitting hard on the wooden floor. My back throbbed. I closed my eyes and leaned my head against the drywall. I was completely empty. I had no fight left. The system was grinding me into dust, and I was simply too tired to prove my own worth to people who refused to see it. My phone buzzed in my hand. The sudden vibration startled me. I lifted the screen. It was 2:34 in the morning. A text message from Bette Gorham illuminated the dark hallway. "The Child Protective Services investigation is officially closed," the message read. "Unfounded. Your court-ordered drug test came back completely clean. Andrea Folks filed her final report to the judge today. Her exact note states that the home environment is stable, there is zero evidence of substance abuse, and the initial report appears entirely retaliatory in nature. I have already added this document to our upcoming motion. I read the glowing text message again. Then I read it a third time. Appears entirely retaliatory in nature. A social worker I had met exactly one time had walked into my house, looked past the rumors, looked past the expensive Charleston lawyer, and seen the absolute truth. I was not screaming into the void alone. Someone else had seen it. I pushed myself up from the floor. My spine screamed in protest, but I forced my legs to straighten, bearing my own weight. I walked back to the doorway of Piper's room. I looked at the drawing of the divided house sitting on her small desk. I could not give my daughter an undivided house if the foundation was built on a massive lie. Sometimes, the only way to save a structure is to tear the rotting wood down to the ground and start over. I opened the text thread with my lawyer and typed my reply. I am not dropping the case. Keep going. Judge Harlan issued the interim order on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Donovan had packed 3 large suitcases and moved out of the house. He signed a short lease on a furnished apartment in Fairmont. He was living exactly 3 miles down the road from Shea Calloway. The house became quiet. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, solid silence that possessed an actual physical texture, pressing against my ears the moment the sun went down. For 9 years, my evenings had been scored by the predictable soundtrack of my husband, the low rumble of a sports broadcast echoing from the living room television, the heavy thud of his leather work shoes dropping onto the entryway rug, the mechanical groan of the garage door opening at 11 o'clock at night because he suddenly claimed we were out of milk. Now, there was nothing. Just the creak of the old wooden floorboards settling as the evening temperature dropped, and the chirping of summer crickets drifting through the open kitchen window. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. Half of the closet was completely empty. A row of bare wooden hangers dangled from the metal rod. The scent of his aftershave had faded from the room, but a faint, lingering trace of it still clung to the fabric of the decorative pillows on the bed. I stood in the center of the room, bathed in the yellow light of the street lamp shining through the window blinds, and realized I was entirely alone. I opened the top drawer of my nightstand, searching for a bottle of over-the-counter sleep medication. My fingers brushed past a small plastic bottle and touched a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat against the top of the wooden nightstand. It was the drawing Piper had made on the family tablet when she visited me in the hospital recovery ward. I had printed it out and pinned it to my corkboard 14 months ago. I looked at the crude, colorful lines drawn by an 8-year-old child. There was a stick figure of a woman lying flat on a hospital bed. Beside the bed stood a taller figure representing her father. His face was turned entirely away. He was staring out a square window into the blank space beyond. When I first saw this drawing in the hospital, I thought it was just a sweet, clumsy sketch. Standing in my empty bedroom 14 months later, the truth of the image hit me with the force of a physical blow. My daughter had not drawn a clumsy picture. She had drawn the absolute, undeniable truth. Her father was turning away. He was always turning away. I stared at the stick figure of the woman lying on the bed. She was just waiting. She was lying there, completely immobile, waiting for the man to turn back around. She believed he would eventually turn back, because she had been deeply conditioned to believe that love required endless, agonizing patience. A memory surfaced from the darkest corner of my mind, sharp and vivid. I remembered the smell of medicinal rubbing alcohol and the sound of a boiling kettle. My mother suffered from chronic lupus. I was 12 years old when I learned how to wash all the dinner dishes and scrub the kitchen floors so she could rest her swollen joints. I was 14 years old when I missed my middle school spring dance because she had a sudden flare-up and I needed to sit beside her in a sterile emergency room waiting area. My mother never once complained. She wore her silent suffering like a badge of honor. She firmly believed that a good woman was a woman who endured. My father was not a cruel man, but he was a chronically absent one. Whenever my mother became too sick to manage the house, he would suddenly schedule weekend fishing trips, or pick up late shifts at the factory, or spend his evenings sitting on a bar stool at the local tavern. He went absolutely anywhere that was not the house with the sick wife. When I asked my mother why he left us alone so often, she would stroke my hair with her trembling fingers and tell me that he loved us in his own way. She told me that we just needed to be strong for him. She endured his absence until the disease finally took her life when I was 23. I looked down at the drawing of the man looking out the window. I had repeated the exact same pattern. I had married a man who vanished the moment life became difficult. I had chosen a man who mirrored my father, and I had played the exact role of my mother. I stayed quiet. I did not complain. I lay in a hospital bed with a broken spine and waited for him to arrive 9 hours late, because my entire life had taught me that enduring pain was the only way to earn love. The identity of the selfless caregiver had kept my mother trapped in a lonely marriage until the day she died, and that exact same identity was currently holding me hostage to a man who had driven past my flipped car on a rainy highway. I folded the drawing carefully. I did not throw it away. I placed it inside the thick manila folder containing my divorce documents. It was not legal evidence. It was a reminder. The truth had been sitting right in front of me from the very beginning. If only I had been brave enough to open my eyes and look at it. I picked up my cell phone. I did not call my lawyer. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed the number for Dr. Connor, the clinical therapist I had seen briefly after my accident. I was not calling her because the court demanded a mental health evaluation. I was calling her because for the first time in 36 years, I actually wanted to tear down the walls inside my own head. 3 days later, I walked into Bet Gorham's office on High Street. Bet looked up from her paperwork as I sat down in the leather guest chair. She set her silver pen on the oak desk and studied my face. She tilted her head slightly. "You are sitting differently today," Bet observed quietly. "Your posture is completely different. Your spine is straighter." "I do not want to just win the divorce settlement anymore," I told her, my voice carrying a steady, ringing clarity that surprised even me. "Then what exactly do you want?" "I want my daughter to grow up in a house where her mother does not pretend that everything is perfectly fine when it is not. I want Piper to know that when someone treats her terribly, she has the absolute right to speak up. She has the right to walk away. She has the right to be angry without asking anyone for permission." Betta leaned back in her chair. "That is a personal need, Linnea, not a legal strategy." "I want to amend the filing," I continued, ignoring her comment. "I want to add the claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I want everything on the public record. The theft of the $43,000 medical reimbursement, driving past the accident scene, lying to the emergency dispatcher, the retaliatory Child Protective Services report. I want the court to see the entire pattern of outrageous conduct." Bet nodded slowly, her eyes gleaming with sharp approval. "We can add the claim. But there is a new complication we need to discuss. Your husband sent an email to my office this morning." She slid a printed piece of paper across the desk. "He is formally inviting Piper to his wedding," Bet said. "He and Shay Calloway are getting married at the Stonewall Resort in Roanoke. The ceremony is scheduled for the second weekend of September." I stared at the printed email. He is inviting his 8-year-old daughter to watch him marry the woman he was texting while her mother was lying on a surgical table? "Yes," Betta said flatly. "And according to the interim custody schedule established by Judge Harlan, the second weekend of September belongs to him. It is his designated parenting weekend. You do not have the legal authority to block him from taking her to the wedding." I closed my eyes. The final custody hearing was not scheduled until November. If everything went according to our plan, the judge would see the full picture and strip his custody rights down to the bare minimum. But the wedding was going to happen in September. It was going to happen before the trial. "Piper is going to go," I whispered. "Piper is going to go," Betta confirmed. "I cannot advise you to interfere with a court-ordered custody weekend, Linnea, but I can tell you this. An 8-year-old child has a voice, and if her father insists on placing her in the middle of a crowd of 200 people, whatever happens in that crowd is the direct result of his own choices." 2 weeks before the wedding, I stood in my kitchen washing the dinner dishes. The evening air was crisp, hinting at the approaching autumn. Piper sat at the kitchen table, swinging her legs and drawing on a fresh sheet of paper with her crayons. "I am going to the wedding next week," Piper said suddenly, without looking up from her drawing. "Dad told me I get to wear a fancy new dress. He said it is going to be a really big party." I turned off the running water and dried my hands on a cotton towel. "Do you want to go to the wedding, sweetie?" Piper stopped coloring. She traced the edge of her paper with her thumb. "I do not know. Shay is the lady Dad works with, right?" "Yes," I said carefully. "She is." Piper fell silent for a long moment. She reached down into her small backpack resting on the chair next to her and pulled out the old iPad mini. The screen was cracked in the top right corner. "Mommy," Piper said, her voice dropping to a quiet whisper. "I saw the text messages on the tablet. I saw them a long time ago. I do not understand all the big words. But I saw that Dad was sending messages to Shay when you were in the hospital." My heart hammered against my ribs. The ghost of my mother screamed at me to protect my child from the ugly truth. to hush her, to tell her it was adult business and she should not worry her pretty little head about it. It was the exact same lie my mother had fed me for years. I pulled out a wooden chair and sat down at the table directly across from my daughter. "What did you see, Piper?" I asked softly. "Dad told me he was at his office when you got hurt," Piper said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "But he sent a message to Shay that said he was at her house. My third-grade teacher told us that if someone says two completely different things about the exact same night, it means they are telling a lie." I took a deep breath. The air in the kitchen felt incredibly still. "Your teacher is very smart. That is a lie." Piper looked down at the tablet in her hands. "My teacher also said that if a situation confuses you, you should read the confusing words out loud and ask for help to understand them. She said you should ask questions when other adults are around to help you find the right answer." Piper looked up at me, her brown eyes wide and painfully earnest. "Mommy, I want to ask Dad why he said two different things. I want to ask him at the wedding party, in front of the other adults, so they can help me understand." I looked at my daughter. I did not tell her to do it. I did not manipulate her into becoming a weapon for my divorce case. But I also absolutely refused to silence her. I refused to pass down the generational trauma of being a quiet, enduring woman who swallowed lies just to keep the peace. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "You have the right to ask any question you want, Piper," I told her, my voice thick with emotion, "and I promise you, I will be right there in the back row listening to every single word." The second weekend of September arrived with a heavy, unseasonable heat that settled over the Stonewall Resort like a thick wool blanket. I sat in the very back row of the rented white folding chairs, my hands resting lightly in my lap, watching the exact moment my husband's carefully constructed world shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Frances Calloway, the mother of the bride, had just dropped her perfectly folded linen napkin onto the table and walked straight down the center aisle without looking back. The silence she left in her wake lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then, the garden erupted. A low, frantic murmur swelled through the crowd of 200 guests. The rustle of expensive silk dresses and the clinking of ice in cocktail glasses created a chaotic, buzzing soundtrack. Shay stood frozen at the altar. Her bright bridal smile had completely collapsed, leaving her face pale and entirely drained of blood. She looked down at her hands, her shoulders trembling violently under the sheer white fabric of her gown. Donovan's face turned the color of a bruised plum. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering against the stone pathway. The sharp sound of breaking glass finally snapped him out of his paralysis. He lunged forward, closing the distance between himself and our 8-year-old daughter in 2 massive strides, and snatched the microphone right out of Piper's hand. The speaker let out a deafening, high-pitched screech that made several guests cover their ears. "It is just a joke," Donovan announced to the crowd. His voice boomed artificially loud through the sound system. He forced a wide, desperate smile that did not reach his panicked eyes. "Kids and their wild imaginations, right? Let us get the music back on and celebrate." Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. The string quartet sat completely frozen in their chairs, their wooden bows resting motionless across their knees. Shay slowly lifted her head. She looked at Donovan, her eyes wide and wet with sudden tears. Then she looked at the empty chair at the front table where her mother had been sitting just moments before. She gathered the heavy layers of her white tulle skirt in both hands, turned her back on my husband, and walked rapidly toward the resort lobby. A chorus of confused whispers followed her all the way across the grass. I stood up from my plastic chair. My legs felt incredibly solid beneath me. My fused lower spine did not ache at all. I stepped out of the back row and walked straight down the center aisle. Donovan saw me approaching. The fake smile instantly vanished from his face. Pure, unadulterated terror flared in his dark eyes. He realized in that exact moment that I had not just stumbled into the back row of his wedding by accident. He saw my calm, measured expression, and he finally understood that I knew absolutely everything. "Piper," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the murmurs of the stunned guests. "It is time to go home now." Piper looked up at her father. She did not cry. She simply slung her small pink backpack over her shoulder, turned away from him without a single word, and walked toward me. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers felt warm and safe inside mine. We walked back down the aisle together, moving smoothly through the sea of staring faces. I kept my head held high, and I did not look back at the altar even once. 3 weeks later, the crisp chill of October swept through Morgantown. I sat in the leather guest chair inside Bet Gorham's office on High Street, The room smelled of dark roast coffee and aged paper. Outside the window, the Monongahela River reflected the dull gray clouds of the autumn sky. Bet sat behind her massive oak desk. She did not have her silver pen in her hand today. Instead, she had a completely finalized stack of legal documents resting squarely in front of her. Marshall Tate called my office yesterday afternoon, Bet said, her voice carrying a rare note of profound satisfaction. He is dropping the request for joint custody. He is dropping the dispute over the marital assets. He wants to settle immediately. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Why the sudden change of heart? Because your husband ran out of money to pay a high-profile Charleston defense attorney, Betta explained, leaning back in her chair. The wedding incident did not just stay at the Stonewall Resort. Someone in the crowd recorded Piper reading those text messages on their cell phone. They forwarded the video directly to the Human Resources Department at PharmaCorp. I lowered my coffee cup to the desk. They fired him. They fired both of them, Bet corrected smoothly. Corporate policy strictly forbids undisclosed romantic relationships between regional managers and their direct subordinates. But the fatal blow was the financial aspect. Once Human Resources launched an internal audit, they discovered that Donovan had been renting an apartment for Shay using funds he claimed were tied up in medical debts. The company deemed it an unforgivable liability. He was terminated immediately without a severance package. I looked out the window at the muddy river. The man who had cared so deeply about his professional image, the man who had abandoned his injured wife in a hospital bed to protect his secret life, had finally been crushed by the exact same secrets. So what are the settlement terms? I asked. Bet opened the top folder. You retain full ownership of the house. He assumes the remaining debt on his vehicle and the broken lease agreement for the Fairmont apartment. He is legally required to reimburse the full $43,285 he stole from your health savings account, paid directly from the liquidation of his retirement portfolio. And most importantly, you receive primary physical custody of Piper. He gets supervised visitation every other weekend, pending a 6-month probationary period. She pushed the stack of papers across the desk toward me. He is signing his copy at Marshall Tate's office this morning. You just need to sign right here on the dotted line, Linnea, and it is completely over. I picked up the silver pen resting next to the folder. I looked at the heavy black ink printing my name across the top of the legal decree. I thought about the terrified, desperate woman I had been 10 months ago, crying alone in the kitchen, trying to convince my daughter that her father was working late to support our family. I thought about the ghost of my mother, begging me to stay quiet and endure the pain. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with firm, dark strokes. I did not just sign away my marriage. I signed away the generational curse of the endlessly forgiving wife. I walked out of Bet's office and down the wooden stairs to the street. The autumn wind bit sharply against my cheeks. As I reached the sidewalk, a familiar white sedan pulled into the parking space directly in front of the building. The engine cut off. Donovan stepped out of the car. He looked terrible. He wore a wrinkled gray sweater that hung loosely over his shoulders. He had not shaved in several days, and dark, heavy bags dragged down the skin under his eyes. The effortless, charming arrogance that had defined his entire personality was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate exhaustion. He stopped on the pavement when he saw me standing by the door. We stared at each other for a long moment, separated by 5 feet of concrete. "Are you happy now?" Donovan asked. His voice was raspy, laced with a bitter, venomous edge. "You absolutely ruined my life, Linnea. You destroyed my career. Shay left me. I have absolutely nothing left. I hope you are proud of what you planned." I looked at the man I had loved for 9 years. I searched my chest for a spark of anger, or a trace of sorrow, or even a flicker of lingering pity. I found absolutely nothing. The space where my love for him used to live was entirely clean and beautifully empty. "I did not plan anything, Donovan," I told him, my voice perfectly level and devastatingly calm. "I just stopped hiding your secrets. I let the world see exactly who you are." He clenched his fists at his sides. "You used our daughter as a weapon." Piper asked a question because she was confused by your lies. I corrected him smoothly. "And you are standing on this sidewalk today because you drove past my crushed car at 67 miles an hour in the freezing rain, and you chose to keep driving. You did this to yourself." I did not wait for his response. I turned away from him, pulled my coat tightly around my shoulders, and walked down the street toward my own car. I heard him call my name once, a pathetic, broken sound caught in the autumn wind. I did not turn back. 6 months later, spring returned to Morgantown. I was standing in the physical therapy clinic on a bright Tuesday morning. The large windows let in a flood of warm, golden sunlight. I was working with a new patient, a young woman recovering from a severe knee injury. She was gripping the parallel bars, her face pale with effort, trembling as she tried to take a single step forward. "It hurts too much," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I do not think I can do it." I stepped closer and placed a steady, reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know it hurts," I told her, my voice gentle but entirely uncompromising. "But this specific pain has a purpose. The only way out of the darkness is to walk straight through it. You are much stronger than you think you are." She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on the metal bars, and took a firm step forward. I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile, and marked her progress on my clipboard. My own back hardly ever ached anymore. The surgical scar on my neck had faded to a thin, pale line. I had stopped taking the heavy painkillers months ago, and I no longer woke up in the middle of the night terrified of the empty space in my bed. When my shift ended, I drove home to the house in the suburbs. The driveway was empty. The front lawn was freshly mowed. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the warm, bright kitchen. Piper was sitting at the table, eating a bowl of strawberries and working on her homework. Her nightmares had completely vanished over the winter. She was laughing more often, her bright personality expanding to fill the quiet spaces of the house. "Hey, sweetie," I said, kissing the top of her head. "How was school today?" "It was really good," Piper replied, pointing to a piece of paper resting next to her math workbook. "I drew a new picture during art class." I picked up the drawing. It was not a sketch of a hospital room, and it was not a picture of a house divided by a jagged red line. She had drawn a picture of the two of us. We were standing on a bright green hill under a brilliant blue sky. I was holding her hand. My spine was drawn perfectly straight. There was no man in the picture looking out a window, and there was no one waiting in the background. It was just a mother and a daughter, stepping boldly into the sunlight together. I pinned the drawing directly to the center of the refrigerator door. I poured myself a glass of cold water, leaned against the kitchen counter, and listened to the happy, unbroken sound of my daughter telling me about her day. The hollow space in my chest was finally filled. I was no longer a woman defined by how much pain I could quietly endure. I was a woman who had survived the absolute worst, and I had built a beautiful, truthful life on the other side. You spend your entire life being told that a good woman is a quiet woman. You are taught to swallow your doubts, to ignore the strange scent on a collar, to rationalize the missing money, and to build a comfortable narrative over the cold, hard truth. You convince yourself that enduring pain is the ultimate proof of love, that keeping the peace is worth the heavy cost of your own sanity. But suffering in silence does not make you noble. It simply makes you invisible. When you accept the unacceptable just to hold a broken family together, you are paying for an illusion with your own reality. True strength is not measured by how much betrayal you can quietly tolerate. True strength is looking at the person who left you bleeding in the dark and deciding that their comfort is no longer your responsibility. It is realizing that the foundation of your life is rotting, and having the sheer courage to tear it down to the dirt so you can finally build something real. The moment you stop making excuses for the people who hurt you is the exact moment you take your power back. You do not have to wait for an apology that will never come. You only need to open your eyes, trust your own instincts, and completely refuse to carry the weight of someone else's lies. Have you ever found yourself making endless excuses for someone whose actions consistently broke your heart? Have you ever had to walk away from a life you spent years building because the truth finally became too loud to ignore? Tell me your story in the comments below. I am reading, I am listening, and I promise you, you are never walking through the dark alone.